Hey, Mike, thanks so much for being on the show.
It's my pleasure, Deepak. Thank you for having me.
Let me ask you a set of rapid fire set of questions.
Okay.
What is the best advice you've ever gotten?
The best advice I've ever received. I've received a lot of advice over the years, and most of it's been pretty good. But the best advice probably is to do what the good book says and treat others as you would have them treat you.
Makes sense. What inspires or motivates you to be doing what you're doing?
Um, well, with respect to lobbying, which I've been doing for 32, on to 33 years for the North Carolina Home Builders Association. What inspires me to work with them is the quality of my membership. I have great respect for my members and what they do. And there are a lot of things that human beings can live without, but shelter is not one of them. So what my members do is critical to citizens of North Carolina as well as the United States, as well as across the world. So from that perspective, it's an honor to work for a profession that does such an important task and provide them the kind of representation that they deserve. And it's been, a long journey. When I first started, and we'll get into more detail, I'm sure, as you take us through, we go through my career, but one of the things that motivated me to join the Home Builders in 1989 was the fact that they, as the leading environmental lobbyists of the time, said about the North Carolina Home Builders Association, he said they're not even on the radar screen with respect to the North Carolina General Assembly and government affairs in general. And so it was a challenge basically to put them on the radar screen and to put them in a situation where we could have influence on policy. We, for the good, and we believe as a result of the success that we've had, that it's improved home ownership opportunities for citizens in North Carolina and provided we've met a need. So it's rewarding from that, certainly from that perspective.
Why is it important for the youth to be in government relations?
Well, despite its lack of, well, I think probably the best way to say is the public really doesn't understand what lobbying is all about. And that's one reason that I am appreciative that you're doing these podcasts, because I think your listeners will learn a lot about what they need to know about this aspect of government, which is critical. The need for lobbying is well, maybe the best way to explain it is think about there's 170 members of the North Carolina General Assembly, and they come from all walks of life. They're basically good people, some better than others, but at the end of the day, they're I think interested in doing the best possible job they can to represent their constituents. But there's no way that they can know even a small percentage of the things that they need to know in order to vote effectively and intelligently on the issues that come in front of them. So our primary role is to provide knowledge, provide information to those folks so they can make the appropriate decision. And I don't think the public understands that very well. They think it's a social thing, or they think it's, even they may think it's nefarious. But at the end of the day, it's critical. And the best sort of decision on legislation or on policy is made when people have all the information and can make an intelligent decision in the best interest of the people. And so getting back to answer your question, one of the things we have to do is a better job of educating young people as to exactly what this role is and why it's important, and why it's important to have people that, well, it's an honorable profession, and it is a profession that's critical to the success and the system of government that we have in this country. And young people will find it as a rewarding career if they choose to participate in it.
What would you do if you were the governor for one day?
Well, since I represent the home building industry, I think probably what I would do is make it easier to build houses. And I would, of course, I would need the cooperation of the General Assembly to change the law, but I certainly could do some things by executive action that would make it easier, I think, to build homes and provide more opportunities for people to own homes. And I would pursue those policies.
What is the one skill you think is essential for someone to be a good lobbyist?
Well, fundamentally, you got to be honest. That's integrity is the key. You have one thing that is paramount, and that's your credibility. Because these 120 legislators in the House and 50 in the Senate have to decide in a fairly short period of time whether or not they can believe what you're telling them and act on it. And so someone who fails to, and I don't mean lie, but someone who fails, clearly people who lie are not going to lie very long. They're going to get a bad reputation and nobody's going to have anything to do with it. But the other aspect of it is you have to tell the whole story. That's the other part of credibility. You have to not only tell them your side, you also have to tell them the other side if there is one, and there typically is. And sometimes there's 2 or 3 different sides to the same story. So it's important for them to understand if they're going to take a position, this is the likely opposition. This is what the opposition is going to say. This is the real world costs of what you're doing, or this is what it's going to produce. So that's critical. If it's one thing, it's clearly integrity. I mean, there's several other things that are very important. Hard work. There's no substitute for it. If you work hard, you'll be rewarded. And also you have to be patient. Legislation sometimes takes several sessions to get through. So being patient is another virtue that's important for a lobbyist to have.
What is the one thing you would like to share which very little or very few people know about you?
About me. Well, I love to fly fish. So it's not something that I have the opportunity to do as often as I'd like. And it's not something I talk to people about a lot, but it is something that I enjoy doing, and it's something I grew up doing, and something I look forward to when I had the opportunity.
Oh, that's cool. And what is the best compliment you've ever received?
Well, best compliment I've ever received. Well, I don't know if I can tell you the best one I've ever received, but I just got a recent one. Let me share the most recent. That's the one that comes to mind. A newly elected congressman from North Carolina who served in the General Assembly I sent him a text congratulating him on his victory. And he thanked me for that. And then he also said, to paraphrase, thank you also for demonstrating what the gold standard for lobbying is.
Wow.
So that was a very nice thing for him to say. Yeah, that was very nice. That's up there in the top of compliments I've received.
It's cool.
Very nice. But he was talking about my whole team. He wasn't just talking about me. He was talking about our whole team. So that I share that compliment with my coworkers.
What would you be if you weren't a lobbyist?
Well, I'd probably be what I was before I became a lobbyist. As I'm sure you know from the resume, I was essentially a prosecutor for 15 years, a special prosecutor. And I enjoyed both in state and federal court. And I enjoyed that. It was very rewarding. And I would probably be doing that again if I weren't doing what I'm doing now.
Okay. With all the experience you've had, do you have any crazy stories about lobbying you would like to share?
Crazy stories about what?
About lobbying?
Oh yeah, well, there's all kinds of crazy stories. A lot of funny ones, and a lot that we can't talk about on this podcast. So let's just leave it at that.
Okay. You're right. Okay. The last question I had for you is if you had the time capsule to go back in time, what time or era would you like to go back to?
Wow. Hmm. Well, it would be an interesting period to go back to the time of the Declaration of Independence and to be a fly on the wall, I suppose, in Philadelphia when they were drafting the Constitution and talking to Thomas Jefferson and our founding fathers. That would have been a fascinating period. That'd be a fun trip to take for a couple of weeks. But I'd want to come back. I wouldn't want to live in that era. But I'd love to take a trip for a while.
It's very funny that, I asked this question to a lot of people and a lot of the people answered the same thing. So you probably are in the same boat as they are, which is
How
pretty
about
good.
that? Well, maybe you can get a large time capsule. We can all go together. It'd be fun.
Yes, surely. With that, let's talk a little bit about your past. Can you tell us a little bit about your childhood? Where did you grow up, and how was it like growing up, and what passions did you have then?
I grew up in the mountains of Western North Carolina in Haywood County, which is west of Asheville. The county seat is Waynesville. I grew up on a family farm. My grandfather and my father farmed together. My father was a vocational agriculture teacher at high school level. My mother was a school teacher in elementary school. She later became a district manager for World Book Encyclopedia. So I grew up on a farm, which I wouldn't trade for anything. It was wonderful, but it also motivated me to study. Nothing like being in the middle of a field with a hoe handle in your hand, chopping Johnson grass out of a row of corn that you can't see the other end of, knowing that when you get to the end, you're going to turn around and come back on the next row. Now, manual labor was good for me, but it's not something I wanted to do as a career, much to the disappointment of my grandfather, by the way. But so that I was very active in 4-H as I was growing up. That gave me a lot of opportunities, 4-H clubs. And ultimately, I was elected state president of the 4-H organization in North Carolina in 1968. And I came to school at NC State. I got a degree there in political science. And then it was while I was in school at state that I was an intern from my congressman from back home in the 11th District, Roy Taylor, in the summer of 1970. And that experience, I realized that I could go to law school in Washington and work on Capitol Hill. And so that's what I did. And I was fortunate to be accepted at George Washington. And I went to work for Senator B. Everett Jordan first, and then worked for Senator Sam Ervin while I was in law school. Went to law school at night and finished in 1975 and worked with one of the people I worked with for Senator Ervin was Rufus Edmiston. And Rufus and I were good friends, and I helped him get elected Attorney General in 1974. And then I came back to work when I finished law school in Washington. I came back in the summer of 1975, took the bar exam, and then went to work with Rufus in the Attorney General's office and worked there through 1984 when he was the Democratic nominee for governor. And I was his I was basically his chief of staff. When he was unsuccessful, I handled the transition with the next Attorney General who had been elected, Lacey Thornburg, who is also from the western part of the state, and I knew already. And he asked me to stay on, and I did. Worked with Judge Thornburg for about 4.5 years, and then the home builders came calling in 1989, and went to work for the North Carolina Home Builders Association. And the reason I did that, might as well go ahead and get the late all on there. The reason I did that was because I had gotten married in 1984. I had a daughter by 1989, a young daughter. Jennifer was about not quite 2 years old. We had one on the way, and Julia, my wife, wanted to stay home. Wanted to be a stay-home mom, and I certainly supported that. Thought that was a great idea, but the problem was we were two-income family, and part of the motivation, I loved working for the Attorney General's office. I loved what I was doing, but in order for her to stay home financially, I had to move into the private sector, and so that was somewhat motivation. And I've already indicated earlier that one of the challenges when the home builders came to see me, they wanted to create an in-house government affairs program, and I saw that as an exciting challenge, particularly to take an organization, as I said, that was generally not on the radar screen, and an opportunity to put them on the radar screen. And 33 years later, I'm still working with them. So it's been an interesting career. So I'll shut up and let you ask some questions.
No problem. That's a really good insight into your past. Tell me, if you could, please tell me why. I mean, how did you get into politics? I mean, I see that you picked Bachelor's of Arts in politics. After high school, what happened as to, why did you go into that field?
Well, primarily because I wasn't going to be a good chemical engineer. I went to NC State with a full scholarship in chemical engineering and pulp and paper technology, a 5-year program, a full ride now, mind you. But by Thanksgiving of my freshman year, it had occurred to me that chemistry and higher level calculus and some of these other courses I was taking were not for me, that I was not going to be successful with that. So I was an engineer for a semester, and I knew I had to transfer to something else. And so as it turned out, I looked at the college catalog and concluded that maybe I might go to political science and be a lawyer. And that's kind of what I decided to do in Thanksgiving of my freshman year. Now, politically, I came from a political family. My grandfather in addition to being a farmer, was also the chairman of the Board of Commissioners in Haywood County for 12 years. He was also the county manager. So when I was growing up, I spent a fair amount of time in the courthouse with my granddad, and he was politically well known in Western North Carolina, and was someone who was very closely connected with a lot of statewide candidates and that sort of thing. So I was very politically oriented even at an early age. And even while I was a prosecutor, I continued to have opportunities, I guess, to go to the General Assembly because of my relationships with some of the members, particularly Speaker Liston Ramsey, who was from my neck of the woods and was a good friend of my grandfather's. So I was also a legislative intern while I was at NC State in 1971 session, which was a great program. I think there were 12 college students. We took 2 courses at NC State and then worked the rest of the time in the General Assembly. I worked for then Lieutenant Governor Pat Taylor, who was the last part-time Lieutenant Governor. He was the Democratic nominee for governor in 1972. He was defeated in the primary by Skipper Bowles, who was Erskine Bowles' father. So an interesting period of time, and I was still very much involved in politics when I was growing up in college, and then even into law school. As I was saying, helped Rufus get elected in 1974. So I've always been involved in political campaigns as well as professional things. When I was in Washington, I had the opportunity to, some great opportunities. One of the things I got to do with Senator Ervin was I got to work on the Watergate Committee, which was quite a historic. We just had the 50th anniversary, as I'm sure you followed that this year, of the break-in. And we had a reunion in Washington in the caucus room where the hearings were held. So it was, but that was quite an experience, and part of history at the time. So,
yeah. And if you had to like turn back the clock and think about all the steps you took through your career, at what point did you feel like yes, government relations is what I would like to get into?
I'm sorry, being a what?
Being a part of government relations, at what point
Oh,
did you feel?
with government relations? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose, realistically, the opportunity the home builders provided, I mean, that was to create a government affairs program. So that was when it was clearly presented. I mean, I did some lobbying. I was for example, I was legal counsel to the SBI. And so I would go to the legislature on things the SBI was interested in, budget things, as well as, bills that criminal justice bills that were being considered. So I continued to have a fair amount of contact with the legislative process, even while I was a prosecutor for that 15-year period. But full-time government relations, started in 1989. So, building the home builders into an organization that had influence was a goal, and it took, sessions to do that. So, but we're pretty pleased about where we are now in having influence on policy.
Okay. And before you joined Builders Association, so you worked in the Senate and then the Department of Justice. Can you tell us, like, what kind of experience or skills did you gain from working there, which probably is helping out right now?
Well, clearly, I mean, I think some of the skills that you use as an effective lobbyist, communication, clearly, and that started early on in my life, but was honed through um, through my career as a lawyer and a prosecutor, my training as a lawyer and my career as a prosecutor. It's all a question of persuasion. As a prosecutor, I had to persuade 12 jurors to vote somebody's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That's actually a little higher standard, a little bit more difficult standard than persuading a legislator to support an issue. But the techniques are similar in terms of you have to know your subject matter, you have to communicate it well, you have to be credible, you have to be liked. It's important to be. You have to be respected. All of those things, all of those traits, translate into being an effective advocate. Whether it's an advocate for the state of North Carolina or the United States government, in the case of prosecutors, as I was doing, or whether it's on behalf, in this case, of the residential construction industry in North Carolina. I mean, it's being an effective advocate. So those sorts of skills that make for an effective advocate are things that were honed, during my career all the way through. For the very and I'll give a lot of credit to 4-H. When I was a kid, having an opportunity to do public speaking when I was 10 or 12 years old, speaking as state 4-H president to 10,000 people at Reynolds Coliseum. It teaches you things that lessons that continue to pay off today. So all of those things were building blocks to give me the skills that I have that I use today.
Very cool. And now that you're with North Carolina Home Builders Association for 30 years, I'm pretty sure you would have worked on a lot of challenging issues, interesting issues. Can you walk us through a few of them, which, you particularly remember?
Sure. I mean, we've had obviously 33 years. We've had a lot of issues, and we have a lot of issues. Home building is one of the most regulated industries in the country. People don't think about it. I've said that we're probably second only to the nuclear energy industry as being regulated. I mean, when you think about it, we have to have government permission to clear our lot. Okay, we have to observe all the environmental laws. We have to make sure that erosion and sedimentation control. We have to do all of those things. We have to have a government permission. We have to have a building permit to start construction. We have to have a certificate of occupancy inspected by the government that our house meets the building code before we're allowed to sell our product. We have to. That's just an example. Incredibly regulated. So the part of and regulation has a cost. And each additional regulation that's put on our industry, some are good, a lot of them aren't. But at the end of the day, is keeping the bad ones away, and the ones that are unnecessary. Because at the end of the day, we're trying to provide a product that people can afford. And that's becoming increasingly difficult. And one of the challenges that we have today is it's becoming almost impossible for millennials and the generations to follow to be able to afford to buy a home. And that is a threat. That is an existential threat to the middle class in this country, because the middle class has built its wealth through the equity gained from owning a home. It has educated children. It has started businesses. It has contributed tremendously to the sorts of quality that you want in a society. And we cannot afford for these generations of young people coming up not to be able to purchase a house because they can't afford it. And that's a tremendous challenge, and one that we're facing today, and that we face throughout the 3 decades. But I would contend that currently that's probably the biggest challenge that as a society that we have. And unfortunately, some of the solutions to this issue are not necessarily popular. One of the things, for example, that we have to do is increase density, because land is so expensive that we cannot afford only to build single-family detached homes anymore. We have to be able to build higher density. We have to be able to build duplexes. We have to be able to build triplexes and quadplexes to make efficient use of land. For example, 2/3 of North Carolina citizens cannot afford the median priced home in North Carolina. But 2/3 of our citizens can afford a duplex. So the question is, but keep in mind that people in single family neighborhoods don't want higher density in their neighborhood. And they also don't want it near them, because they're under the mistaken belief that it's going to harm their property values. So that's one of the challenges, is we have to overcome some of these myths that people hold on to that are not correct, but are so ingrained that politically it's difficult to achieve some of the things that are going to have to be done in order to make sure that we can provide housing for the generations that absolutely have to have it. Because we cannot become a nation of renters. If we could become a nation of renters and we lose the middle class, we may lose our democracy. That's the danger. So it's fundamental problem.
That's a very interesting way to put this, because I've never thought about this anyway. So how would you educate the public as to, how would you change their mindset?
Well, it's difficult. One of the things that that I think is going to happen, frankly, is through the political process. I think people are typically self-interested. I mean, let's face it, we all do things that are in our self-interest. And one of the jurisdictions that has addressed this effectively is the city of Raleigh. They've adopted the so-called missing middle housing that provides higher density in a lot of these, and allows much more flexibility with respect to construction. My personal opinion is one of the reasons that happened is because the city council members that adopted it were ones who they were millennials themselves. And they recognized how difficult it was for them personally and their contemporaries, their friends, to be able to purchase a home. And they saw this as a realistic solution. Whereas the older generation, who already has their house in the single family neighborhood and doesn't want it next door. Now, the problem is, in the most recent election, several people were elected to the Raleigh City Council who do not share that view. So the question now is, are they going to retreat on that issue? So, I mean, I guess in answer to your question, to a certain extent, I think it's going to get taken care of demographically. I think as you elect more millennials to office who understand this problem and recognize that is in their self-interest, and as well as the public interest, to do this, I think things will change. But are the boomers going to change their opinions? Probably not. Are the people who have the interesting thing about that I've observed over 30 years is the people, everyone wants to raise the drawbridge when they get their house. When they own their house, it's like, okay, we could raise the drawbridge. we really don't need any more housing in Raleigh anymore, or Charlotte, or in Greensboro, or Winston-Salem, wherever it might be. It's like, where are all these additional people coming from? They're crowding the streets. They're crowding my schools. It's everybody gets really concerned about it after they buy their house. So part of it is the challenge that comes with fortunately living in a state where people want to come and businesses want to expand, and there's economic opportunity. So we're lucky. We're lucky we have these problems. We're lucky we have these growth-related problems, because there are places in Eastern North Carolina or in Western North Carolina I could take you where they are happy to have a new fast food restaurant because it opens an opportunity for employment. So, there's challenges that are associated with it, but we're pretty lucky to be living in a state and in a community that has economic opportunities for everybody.
That's very well put. Looking towards the future, how do you see yourself in the next few years down the line? Or what kind of advice would you share for youngsters?
Well, I've stepped down as Executive Vice President of the North Carolina Homebuilders Association. It'll be 2 years this December, to my successor, who's doing an outstanding job, Tim Minton. But I remained a part of the legislative team and continued to do general counsel work for the association, because in addition to legislative activities, we also are active in representing the association in cases that are important to our industry as well. I'll give you a quick illustration of that. For about 30 years, we've worked on an issue called vesting. Vesting property rights basically means that you can't change the rules after the game starts. That if you have a project and you get it approved, then all these permits that you may need to finish the project, they can't change the rules with respect to them once you get started. So we've passed a series of legislation where we've moved that process over the years to be more favorable. And we actually, in 2021, we actually put sort of the final touch on legislation to do what we needed to do. And so the vesting is statutorily in the books exactly the way it should be. But unfortunately, we had a court decision last year in which our Court of Appeals interpreted the law incorrectly. Not what the legislature intended, not what we intended when we proposed it. So we're in the process right now of litigating that in the Supreme Court of North Carolina to restore what we believe to be the appropriate legislative intent. So in addition to legislative things, you also have the courts to be concerned about, to be effective, and also the executive branch on how things are being interpreted there. So it's a complicated process. And personally, I enjoy the legislative process. I enjoy the legal side. I don't miss the administrative side of running a trade association. So I'll probably do this for a little while longer. The relationships that I've built over these many decades is kind of special. And as former Secretary of State Thad Ure used to say, that he was the oldest rat in the barn. I'm pretty much the oldest rat in the General Assembly barn these days. So in terms of tenure as a lobbyist, so so I'm gonna continue to do it for a little while longer at least.
And any advice would you like to share? Any tips or do's and don'ts of lobbying?
Well, I mean, to repeat myself, I mean, clearly, you got to be completely credible and thorough and personable, persistent, patient. Can't think of any more P words, but all of those things are important. But I would encourage young people to look at this profession. It's an honorable profession and one that's critically needed, and it's a perspective that it puts you up close to. You don't get to push the buttons. You don't get to push the red and the green buttons, but you're awfully close to making things happen. And you build relationships with a lot of good people. You have influence on state policy, and depending on what clients you represent, you have the opportunity to do some important things to benefit not only your members but also the citizens of North Carolina. So it's rewarding work from that perspective. So I would encourage people particularly young people, to take a look at us. It's an important profession. Take advantage of the opportunities.
Well, Mike, in closing, how would you define happiness?
Well, you get a little philosophical on me, Deepak. How'd you define happiness? Gosh. Well, it's kind of what justice, use another context, is what Justice, I think it was Justice Brennan or Justice White, I don't know which one of them, said. I can't define pornography, but I know it when I see it. I think happiness is kind of the same. I don't know if you can define it, but you know it when you see it. So I'll stick with that.
That's a wonderful way to end this conversation, Mike. I'm so delighted, and it's such an honor to have you on the show. And I'm so glad that you're one of the people who is fighting for having a roof over everyone's heads. Thank you so much for what you're doing, and once again, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Deepak. I appreciate the opportunity. It's great to get to know you. Yeah. Thanks.